Now, public service is associated with government and it is offered and guaranteed by the administrative bodies to its citizens. Many times it so happens that the government comes up with a very efficient plan to address the problem. So technology has actually helped you in terms of reducing the stress as well as the time factor. Good morning and welcome to the first session in Chapter 1, Unit 2, 4th semester Bcom, Good Governance in India, where we are going to speak about the Public Service Guarantee Act of 2011. Now, in this, we are going to first get introduced ourselves to what is public service and why that becomes a very, very important part of the governance topic. Now, public service is associated with government and it is offered and guaranteed by the administrative bodies to its citizens. In a very simple way, whatever work that the public servants, that is the government, is intended or duty bound in terms of serving the citizens of a country, that's where we define it as public service. Now, that public service can be in the form of waterworks or electricity, transportation, general amenities, civic amenities, or it might be anything related to the bill collection, payments, or services. But in general, when we say public service, that means the government is trying to coordinate between the citizens of the country and their various departments in terms of facilitating their services altogether. So now what happens in this entire transaction is that government has to first create a trust in the minds of people. Now, when you go to a water or bill situation or when you go to pay the electricity bill, you are guaranteed, you are confident about the factor that the payment that you have made will reach the government because the collection is done by a governmental body or an institution. Now, that's exactly where the citizen gets a confidence saying that whatever I am paying for, the government is going to take care. The government is giving me a service in the form of electricity or water or roadways or transport for which I am paying a fee. That fee is again collected by a government institution or a body which is going to render him a receipt and give him that confidence that the payment collected from you is going to be acknowledged. So that's exactly where the expectations of trust and communication comes into picture. Followed by the government will offer through various tiers, that is through the state government, local government, and probably, whenever we talk about the equitable standards of living, opening up of schools, hospitals, running a public delivery system in order to improve the standard of people. And these are provided by the government to help the citizens and to live a better standard altogether. So whenever we talk about this factor called as equitable standards, the aim of the government is to make a service standardized, applicable, available, and accessible to each and every people in the country. Now, the government service is not something that is temporary, restricted, or selected kind of a system. It's an open system, which means anybody and everybody can access the entire system and they can keep running it. At the end of the day, when you start seeing this, you will start understanding at some point of time, we are actually helping people to grow in terms of the various standards and allocations altogether. So somewhere down the lane, we are understanding that the government wants to create a platform through which they can serve the people to whatever standards that is required and also address the basic needs of the people when time is required. Now, following which, the factors promoting the public service. Now, a public service in a country like India is very, very important and integral part of the governance process. And that's very important. We need to understand why. Because without proper delivery mechanism in place, we cannot deliver these services to the citizen. So it becomes very important for us that somehow we have to create a system through which we reach the public on time and we are able to handle their stress, handle their problems, offer them solutions that is needed every time. Now, for example, let's look into a general hospital or a government hospital altogether. Every day, hundreds and thousands of people would go to the hospital for their own needs. But if the government is not able to provide them with doctors or with basic facilities, the entire trust on the government in terms of running a public health care will go away. So that's exactly where in the public delivery system, you need to bring in the trust and communication factor. You will not be able to take any kind of assumptions in public delivery system, and rather you have to work on the real-time basis. So every time in government, we try to understand this factor clearly, that the communication has to be real-time, the action has to be real-time, and the solution provided also needs to be realistic in nature. So we are not going to work on the bureaucratic system. We are not going to work on a system that is going to provide some sort of special treatment to a section of people. Rather, we are going to create a system that is transparent, that is efficient, and that tries to address the problems of the people. So if you're going to go through the railways, or you're going to go through the waterways, the electricity, the road transport, aviation, or probably sanitation department, it needs to be open enough in terms of addressing the problems, understanding what exactly the challenges are, and providing an immediate solution. So for all this, you need to have a governance in place. It is not that every time government has to stand, but rather the process of running a system. That's where exactly governance comes into picture. You need to have a process, you need to have a system that will be able the entire office to run in a particular manner, to run in an efficient manner, and provide timely services to the citizens of our country. Moving further, now corruption is one thing that I would definitely like to talk about. Why? Because this is something that disturbs the entire system. Now, whenever we say about like the 58% of the subsidized food grains from the central government does not reach the needed people, the group of people, 36% of it is being siphoned off in the supply chain. And this was a report that was given by the Planning Commission in the year 2009, which means to say that the gap that is being found in a public delivery system is very huge. Many times it so happens that the government comes up with a very efficient plan to address the problem. But the delivery system is not reaching the concerned people. Why? Because there's a lot of lacuna in terms of implementing that solution. So somewhere down the lane, we start seeing that corruption in every format, whether you're going to take it in form of cash, kind, compliments, or any kind of thing, would lead to a complete disruption of the system. So somewhere what happens is that people start losing trust over the government and the institutions. They start thinking that every government institution is a money-making instrument. So if I have to get my work done, for example, I have to get my ration card, or I have to get my Aadhaar card, or I have to get my PAN card, or I have to get my passport, I need to pay money. Now that is where you completely lose trust over the governance process and start blaming the government because you are not being able to establish a right and an efficient manner of serving the public. So that is why I always look into corruption as the most disturbing factor when it comes to governance in India. So you need to understand that corruption cannot be tolerated anymore in this system. Followed by the decentralization. It is one such reform effort advocated throughout the globe. Now, what does that we mean by saying decentralization? Now, this is a very, very important thing. Why? Because whenever we talk about decentralization, that means to say that This is where we are trying to remove you from the clutches of the government, which means let us not depend on one person or one system. We don't have to go on that hub and spoke model where I start putting the pressure on the central government and start blaming the government for everything, start depending on the government for everything. Let me decentralize. Let me make the process simple. Let me make the process independent, and let us start working efficiently by ourselves. So where this decentralization comes in is that when you look into the 73rd and 74th constitutional amendments in the year 1992, though the decentralization of finances and functions may have started way back in 19th century, but still we have yet to make it even more transparent and applicable to all the systems, to all the processes and organizations in India. Followed by which we are going to talk about technology, which is a very, very important thing which is impacting every single walk of life. So if I'm going to talk about government organizations or private organizations, or I'm going to talk about any delivery system, today technology plays a very great role. Why? Because all our apps, all our systems are governed by this technology factor. Why is that coming into picture? What is that they are trying to actually do here? One side, when we look into technology, it is a convenience factor. I can sit at my home and I can start, paying my electricity bill or water bill or telephone bill, which makes it all the more convenient for the customer not to stand in the queue, not to get worried or hassled by that entire crowd. He can just sit wherever he wants and just make the payment online. The other side, when you look into technology, that has reduced a lot of stress on the government personnels, where you start seeing that the service gets limited because of the time factor. So technology has actually helped you in terms of reducing the stress as well as the time factor. But more important, where I am stressing on technology is the transparency and accountability. Why? Because whenever you're going to do anything using your online app, every credential of the customer will get recorded, and using that credential, you will be able to identify yourself as where and what it has happened. So today, you don't have to go back and get worried about things that whether the money got credited, whether he has taken a proper receipt, proper acknowledgement. No need. Everything is right in front of you. So technology actually enables a transparency factor, which is very, very important in governance. Using technology, you will be able to see, you will be able to understand, adjust, and take things forward. So that is why I always say that this is very, very important when it comes to the governance standards. Now, the information and communication technology part brings government services to the beneficiaries in a transparent, speedy, easy, and efficient way. So ICT itself is an opportunity which has been found in all the departments. See, the aim of information communication technology is not just to make their department a super fast or a Superman kind of an image. Using ICT as an option, as a tool, you could probably transform each and every department in the government. So what government is looking here into information technology is an enabler role, rather than looking it into something called as a high intensity technology function. What we are trying to make use, or what we are trying to harp upon here in terms of the information communication technology, is that how can you get the public into picture, make them understand how things work even more efficiently. So today, if you tap your mobile phone and if you start accessing the online apps, you will be able to understand very clearly how things have been moving. So that is why this technology becomes an accountable administration in the long run. Followed by, let's talk about the Public Service Guarantee Act. Now, if you see that the Public Service Guarantee Act is also known as a Right to Public Services Act in some state. It provides legislation, statutory laws, time-bound guarantee by the government to the citizen, and provides mechanism for punishing the errant public servant who fails to provide that stipulated service. Now, this is something very, very relevant in Indian context. Why? Because in spite of reforms, in spite of development and policies being in place, still many people complain about the inefficiency of the government department. This is not something to be mocked upon. This is not something to be demotivated or rebuked upon, but rather this is something to be looked upon from a governance loophole. Why? Because when you start understanding that a citizen is not able to get what he wants on time, automatically that starts building a huge gap between the government and the citizen in terms of communication, in terms of trust and understanding. So what is happening here is that when you talk about the Guarantee Act, it means and it abides by the factor that at any given point of time, a citizen has to be given his rights, a citizen has to be provided with the service, has to be given that solution, has to be addressed with all due respect whenever he tries to seek some public service. Now, the main provisions of the Act is right to public service, where the public by designated official within the stipulated time has to do that work, and he's been entitled to be questioned by the people, saying that how it has happened, what has happened, why it has not been taking place on time. All those functionalities are very, very important at any given point of time. If that is not being done, if that is not been there, you can normally go ahead and a gazette notification can be done. Most of the public policies, acts and the officers will be questioned publicly in terms of inefficiency, and if there might be any cases found, that can be further led into legal action altogether. Now, another factor is that if he suppose fails altogether, there is the first appellate authority to whom the complaint would be raised. The first appellate authority, after making a hearing, can accept or reject the appeal based on the written order. And if it is being done, the applicant can present that factors to that, from which it will go to the second appellate authority, who will make a decision trying to understand in case how to go about taking the application or to reject it. Now, what is very, very important here is that I am enabling the citizen to come forward, put his complaint, go through step by step, understand what has been the problem, why that public servant has not been able to address, take care of the service, why is he not able to do his job that he is being designated to do. The question is not about just putting a case. The question is not about proving your rights or your might. The question is more about how does the system respond to the situation. So whenever you come back and say that, sir, I was not being given the service, I was not provided with what I really wanted, automatically the government has to be questioned. So we need a right, we need an act through which the system can be put under check. So that is what we want in terms of this Public Service Act. Now, by putting a fine, it doesn't mean that the services are going to be restored or things are going to come back to the same function. But what we intend to do here is that send a very strong message to the public and to the system that in case of malfunction, in case of misleadings, in case you are not able to do the function that you have been assigned to, automatically you will be subjected to the court proceedings. So that is where the Public Service Guarantee Act comes into picture. Now, the Citizens Charter, which was first initiated in Britain and it came down in the year 1991, which means to say that the other governments like Australia, Belgium, we're talking about France, Portugal, Spain, Canada, United States, all started following this suit called a Citizens Charter. They have adopted this as a part, as a right of the citizen in terms of their national strategic objectives. So what is very, very important here is that the citizen is the most important part of the society. So the citizen has got all rights to question the government, to question each and every motive, to find out where a loophole is, and he needs to be addressed, he needs to be included in every single activity. Now, that is what is also being followed in India. Now, the most important thing that we are talking about a citizens charter is that they can be assessed by conducting surveys. They can be brought in by into some forum committee where a citizen would be asked to talk about or review about the punctuality system, promptness, behavior, and all other functions that are happening in a government service. So the citizen will now have an open right to go ahead and discuss what has been happening with the governmental departments. With this, I come to the end of today's session. I hope and believe that all the facts and figures that have been discussed through this session would be of a great use to you, both in terms of theory as well as in the practical walk of life. In the upcoming session, we will be discussing more about the Information Act, the right to information, and various other rights that enable a citizen to be a part of the good governance. But until then, stay tuned, stay blessed, and stay enlightened forever. Thank you once again for joining me today on this wonderful session.